Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Rachel Burden and Charlie State.
And our headlines today. A warning that hospitals in England could become overwhelmed with coronavirus cases if MPs don't back new restrictions.
A worrying weekend for 13,000 workers at some of retail's biggest names. The group that owns Topshop, Dorothy Perkins and Miss Selfridge is on the brink of collapse.
Iran blames Israel for the assassination of its most senior nuclear scientist.
Good morning. It's one of the most dramatic finishes in grand final history as St Helens beat Wigan Warriors with the last move of the game to once again be crowned Rugby League Super League champions.
Good morning. It's a rather grey, cloudy weekend ahead of us, but at least it's a little milder than of late. I'll have all the details coming up shortly.
Good morning. It is Saturday, November the 28th. Our top story today, just days before England's national lockdown ends. MPs are being told that hospitals could be overwhelmed if they don't back new restrictions.
The lockdown comes to an end next week to be replaced by the return of 3 tiers on Wednesday. The tiers are tougher than when they were first in place and are being opposed by some Conservative backbenchers.
But writing in the Times newspaper, Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove said that politicians needed to take responsibility for difficult decisions. Here's our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
Preparing for life after lockdown under much tighter measures than before. Kent will be one of the places in Tier 3 of the new system, which many Conservative MPs argue is unfair.
Why is it that we went into the lockdown a few weeks ago in Tier 1 and emerged at Tier 3? We still have some of the lowest COVID rates, not just in Kent, but actually in different parts of West Kent. There's some of the lowest rates in the United Kingdom.
From next Wednesday, the vast majority of England will be under the high or very high COVID alert level, Tiers 2 and 3, where no household mixing will be allowed indoors. Only Cornwall, the Isle of Wight and the Isles of Scilly will be placed under looser restrictions in Tier 1 or medium risk, less than 2% of the population. Defending the new measures, the Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove has said the previous tiers weren't effective enough and tighter restrictions were grimly, inevitably necessary. Writing in the Times, he warns the level of infection is still threateningly high and the pressure on hospitals severe. It comes as the number of people in hospital with COVID-19 in 4 NHS regions of England reached higher totals this month than during the first peak of the pandemic. Labour hasn't yet decided if it will support the new measures, but warns that changes to economic support for businesses will leave local authorities stretched to breaking point trying to help. Meanwhile, there is some extra advice for the Christmas period when the rules will be relaxed. Government scientists say people should consider meeting outdoors where possible. Children should share bedrooms with their parents if staying overnight. And quizzes might be a good alternative to board games, which involve close contact. The government's likely to get its way here at Westminster, despite opposition from MPs, and so restrictions will remain a reality across England well into the new year. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
Hospitals have been told to prepare for the rollout of a coronavirus vaccine from mid-December. NHS providers, which represents hospital trust in England, says intensive work is going on to prepare for the first doses of the jab, but the timeframe will depend on when and if vaccines are approved by regulators.
People in Liverpool, which is moving into the second highest level of restrictions, will undergo more mass testing this weekend. The push, dubbed Super Saturday and Sunday, will see 8 pop-up testing centres placed in areas where take-up of the city's pilot testing programme has been lower.
Pubs, restaurants and bars in Wales are to have tougher restrictions imposed on them following a rise in coronavirus cases. Comes less than 3 weeks after the lockdown in Wales was lifted. The measures, which are yet to be finalised, will come into force next Friday.
Around 13,000 people employed by one of the High Street's biggest retailers, Arcadia, are waiting to hear if their jobs are safe, with the company said to be on the brink of collapse.
Administrators could be appointed to the group, which owns brands such as Topshop, Dorothy Perkins and Burton, as early as Monday. Here's our business correspondent, Katie Austin.
The festive season is approaching, but there's tough news this weekend for the 13,000 people working for Arcadia, with their employer on the verge of collapse. The group had its troubles before the pandemic, already shedding jobs and closing stores. Experts say it had failed to adapt as retail changed.
New fashion businesses which are digital native have found it much easier to adapt to the shopping climate now. It's not easy for any big company who's an old company to adapt in the same way as a new one can do.
Arcadia's owner, Sir Philip Green, had built a huge clothing empire, but in 2015 he sold BHS for £1 and the department store chain collapsed the following year.
Could you, sir, do you mind not looking at me like that all the time? It's really disturbing.
Leaving him first facing fury from MPs, then coughing up hundreds of millions to plug the gap in BHS's pension scheme.
He was definitely a man of his time, but that time has been changing dramatically in recent years, and then we've had the pandemic, which has catapulted it further forward. His style worked really well some years ago. It's worked less and less well.
In a statement, Arcadia said the forced closure of its stores during the pandemic had had a material impact on trading across its businesses. If the administration process does kick off on Monday, the group's 500 shops will continue to trade when they're allowed to reopen in England and Ireland, and a buyer will be sought. The question then is if buyers can be found for Arcadia's brands and who they might be. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Much more to come on that later in the programme. Meanwhile, face-to-face talks resume in London today to try to agree a trade and security deal between the EU and the UK. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, said deep divisions remain. Boris Johnson has also spoken to the Irish Prime Minister and underlined his commitment to reaching an agreement which respects the UK's sovereignty.
Iran has blamed Israel for the assassination of the scientist who's believed to have masterminded the country's nuclear weapons programme.
In a letter to the UN Security Council, Tehran said it reserved the right to defend its people and its interests. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera reports.
The scene of an ambush. The highway where gunmen targeted a vehicle carrying one of the most important figures in Iran's nuclear programme. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was a scientist and senior defence official, but Western intelligence services have long believed he was the driving force in Iran's quest for a nuclear bomb. Iran has always said its nuclear programme was peaceful, but it's been claimed Fakhrizadeh was leading work on Project Ahmad to develop a weapon. In 2018, he was singled out by Israel's Prime Minister.
This is how Dr. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, head of Project Ahmad, put it. Remember that name, Fakhrizadeh.
Iran's foreign minister quickly responded to his death with this tweet. Terrorists murdered an eminent Iranian scientist today. This cowardice, with serious indications of Israeli role, shows desperate warmongering of perpetrators. Israel is widely assumed to have been responsible. But why now? Iran's nuclear programme was constrained under an international deal signed in 2015. But in 2018, President Trump pulled the US out of the deal, and Iran has been growing its stockpile of nuclear material. President Trump is reported to have looked at and then decided against a military strike just 2 weeks ago. But Israel may now be seeking to take advantage of the window whilst he's still in office.
Iran has been under economic blockade for the last few years. It is a country of 80 million people facing the most severe COVID pandemic in the region under sanctions, in which it cannot access basic medicines and healthcare and medical equipment for its people. It's important to bear that in mind, and the Iranian government surely is aware of the extreme pressures it's facing at home.
Emergency vehicles were still at the scene hours after Fakhrizadeh's death. The struggle over Iran's nuclear programme has been going on for close to 2 decades. But in the midst of an American presidential transition, this looks set to be a moment of tension and uncertainty. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Well, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, is in the region. She says the assassination is very significant.
It comes nearly a year after Iran's leading commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, Qasem Soleimani, was killed. This time, as with the earlier killing, the question is, how will Iran respond? It comes at a very significant, a very delicate moment. Only weeks left in the administration of President Donald Trump. We already know that President-elect Joe Biden has talked about rejoining the Iran nuclear deal that President Trump pulled out of in 2018. this move is being seen not just as an effort to strike a blow against Iran's nuclear program, a program, it has to be emphasized, Iran emphasizes it doesn't have a nuclear weapons program, but Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, for years now, particularly by Israeli and American intelligence, was regarded as associated with the covert program. And this kind of an assassination, we don't know yet who carried it out, but this kind of move could possibly complicate the efforts of the new US administration to try to open a new chapter with Iran, as difficult as that was going to be, even without this assassination.
Lise Doucette reporting for us there. Time now is 10 minutes past 6. A couple of other stories for you this morning. A rare plant has reappeared more than a century since its last confirmed sighting. Known as grass polly, the pink flower came out of hiding after seeds were disturbed during restoration work at a pond in Norfolk. Scientists say conservation efforts could lead to the return of other forgotten species. There clearly is another alternative version of that story, which it was there all the time, but no one's seen it.
Yes, it was hiding. It's very pretty, though.
Yeah, lovely, absolutely lovely.
And this has got to be my favourite story of the day. You might have seen this last night. It was doing the rounds on social media, actually. We know lots of Christmas lights are going up this weekend. Switch-ons happening all over the place. If you're planning to impress anyone with a grand switching on ceremony, well, here is a valuable lesson in the importance of timing. Just watch closely.
4, 3, 2, 1.
It makes me laugh every time I see it. It's the Mayor of Bridgewater in Somerset and a council colleague being a little bit slow with the ceremonial plunger. And it's the fact that it takes the plunger sort of several efforts to get right.
Are we going to try it again? Now we know. So go through the countdown. Can we have the countdown?
1.
We missed it.
Do you know what? Ironically, given we were talking about timing, we actually had me in frame when we were looking at the thing going off. All right.
Here we go again.
Coming up now.
2, 1.
It's only just. It's so close. So they were nearly on it.
I should say, they have responded to going viral. It's one of these classic things that no one would have been paying any attention to the town switch on necessarily otherwise, or not many people. But a council spokesman said they were glad the lights have brought more happiness than we planned. And thank you for that. We appreciate it.
Good response.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.